Mr. Ambassador of France, thank you so much for letting us visit.
Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to have you in the small French territory in Oslo.
It's a wonderful, wonderful residence. You not only have a great embassy over there, but you also have a wonderful apartment for a residence.
It's a Norwegian villa built by somebody who was in shipping at the beginning of the last century, and probably he has been successful in his activity.
I truly believe so, and you can see the shipping boats over there, which is probably the most known harbor in the world, or in Norway, I mean. So yeah.
He was close to his activity.
Yeah, he probably was. And the first topic we will talk to you about is security policy. And here is France is the largest country in Western Europe, with borders to 8 countries. With Britain, it's 9. Regards to your geopolitical position, how is your relationship to your next-door neighbors today? And compared to previous history, has your relationship to your neighbors ever been better?
No, it has never been better. We have been at peace with our neighbors since 1945. And if you look back at history before that time, you will see how many times we have been at war. And the last 2 of these wars were the most devastating events in human history. So indeed, we have never been more secure. Not only are we at peace, but it's much more than that. We are all part of, I would say, the same project. It's a political project, it's an economic project, it's how we share the same values, the same faith in democracy. Our cooperation is on every subject, every day, by thousands of different channels, at government levels, indeed, institutions, but also at many other. Our economy has reached a level of integration unknown in the past. But the main achievement of all that, and it's what I tell my children sometimes, is peace. My generation has not known war, but we are the first. Those generations coming after mine, I very much hope they will never know war on the European continent, because they will inherit of this extraordinary achievement. But if I think to the generation before mine, my parents were indeed born during the Second World War, and one of my grandfather has been fighting for 4 years between 1914 to 1918. He was lucky enough to survive the First World War, but still it took 4 years of his life, and it took millions of lives to other people. So yes, we have never been better on the European continent than we are now.
Which neighbor is your favorite neighbor and has the most cooperation with today?
Well, all our neighbors are favorite indeed, but the one which we have the closest, I would say, relation is indeed Germany. And it is at the core of this peace project, because what was at the core of the 2 world wars before? Well, it was also France and Germany, not only us, but indeed we were central in these extraordinary tragic events. So the fact that we have been able to reconciliate and to overcome extraordinarily painful memories and tragic situation is really the cornerstone of the European peace. So our cooperation with Germany, which is once again more than cooperation, which is friendship and alliance on every matter, is indeed something crucial to maintain the balance in Europe. And you can see so many examples of that at every moment. The last one is how we manage by a common proposal to make Europe decide a huge recovery plan to face the pandemic. If France and Germany had not agreed on the size of this plan, and had not pushed it forward together, probably it would have been much more difficult to reach this goal. And this is the last example. I could take many others.
Exactly. How do you view the future of the relationship between Germany and France? Because Angela Merkel is probably finished with her time as Prime Minister this fall. Emmanuel Macron is up for re-election in not a long time. And how do you view the future of this great relationship?
Well, this great relationship dates back to General de Gaulle and Konrad Adenauer, who was at the time Chancellor for Germany, and it has gone through every human change in both countries through decades. So we had a duo between, at the time our president was Valéry Giscard d'Estaing 40 years ago, with Chancellor Schmidt. We had François Mitterrand and Chancellor Kohl, and so on. So France and Germany has this profound understanding that their good relation, more than good once again, is crucial for the future of Europe, and all those who are taking the wheel, both in France or in Germany. It's a natural respiration of democracy that people change. They know that, and they go on with that. So I would say there is one permanent element in our foreign policies. From French side, it's the friendship with Germany, and I believe that from Germany, it's a friendship with France. It doesn't mean we are in a position to dictate to other EU members what should be done. It means that we ensure that our profound understanding helps Europe to work better, that we are a positive force in Europe. It doesn't mean we agree always instantly on everything. It's not true. If you look at the French-German relationship, you can perfectly say at this moment you are not completely on agreement on this or not completely on agreement on that, and it would be true. But what is also true is that the willingness to find solution is always what presides to German-French relations. Even when we sometimes don't exactly have the same view, because we don't have exactly the same history, we don't have exactly the same position on the map. It explains what sometimes we look more toward the south, and perhaps Germany look more toward the east or toward the north, but still we always manage to find common grounds.
And that's a very, very interesting thing, because you got in France, you got Marine Le Pen, which everyone knows about, which is the biggest competitor to Emmanuel Macron, or at least she was in the last election. You can see the US with the election of Donald Trump kind of ruined a lot of relationship between the United States with Europe. Would you ever consider a similarity between Marine Le Pen and her influence, and kind of ruin maybe cooperation between France and Germany as similar to how the United States?
I don't comment on French politics. As an ambassador, I'm representing my country, and I'll say the whole of it. So you cannot get from me appreciation on, I would say, French components of the French politics, because I would be beyond my mandate if I did that. So
it's 100% understandable.
I cannot answer your question.
Exactly the same as we would have. We expect our ambassadors in Norway to do if we change our government here. So that's 100% understandable. But back to your security policy. There is a common thought that France has an independent foreign policy compared to other NATO members, such as the United States, as the UK. How can you describe the main targets in French foreign policy today?
Well, foreign policy is always the result of quite complex factors. It's dictated by geography. It's also a product of history of a country, and indeed it's also the product, I would say, of a view of the world, how you relate to others, and what is your own analysis of what your contribution can be in the world. So when it comes to all that for France, I would say what we are mostly trying to do is first to be, I would say, a power-seeking balance. We don't deny the fact we have some power. We are still one of the most important economy in the world. We still have a quite significant military force. We are at the heart of Europe, as you recalled previously. So all these elements, what do we use them for? And the answer is we try to achieve first our own safety, and our own safety is based on the idea we should seek for peace and not for adventure or threat. So our first goal indeed is to establish in the area we are living, that is continental Europe, as many factors of stability and security as we can. We do this through different projects. The main one is, once again, European Union. We have talked about that previously. The other one is indeed the alliance we are participating to, and the main one is NATO. So our first goal is this notion of seeking peace and stability through balance. This is, I would say, the necessary condition of a foreign policy, and it's indeed an important goal. But what do we do when we have achieved that? One other aspect for us, dictated by geography, is to establish a better partnership in the southern direction. That means through Mediterranean and the African continent, and there are many things to be done there to achieve that. And another important aspect, strategic goal for us, is to make that this European space we are belonging to and we contribute to is as sovereign as possible, so not dependent from other players in the world. And these huge players, well, we can easily see who they are. Some of them are close friends and allies. Some others are more competitors or systemic rivals, as we have qualified them. It's more China I am talking about. And we try to make sure that being in Europe, we have the means of our independence, our sovereignty, and that we are able to provide to the people living there, first safety, and second, I would say the level of prosperity and the capacity to take their own decision. And very important, I would say, a deciding point of the French foreign policy is to make sure that we still are, at the grown-ups table, not at the children table, and worse, not in the menu. And this is not something you can just decide. It's something you achieve by making the right choices, having the right capabilities. Let's take one example, the digital sector. Obviously, Europe has not been at the first rank of developing activities in the digital sector for the past years. The question is now, how can we do better in the future to make sure we are not completely dependent from foreign companies who might seek good but also might have their own interest. And if we want to change that and to make sure we can make our own choices, we must change that. Or another example dictated by the recent events is the health sector. How do we make sure that in the future we will be able to have all necessary tools to face a new pandemic. That is the question of the first response products like masks. You observed at the beginning of the pandemic, everybody was looking for masks in Europe because we had forgotten perhaps this could happen, and we were dependent, not for a long time, but for a few weeks or a few months of importation from outside Europe. Now it's we have succeeded to solve this problem. But after that comes indeed the question of vaccine, much more important, and we realize that perhaps we were not completely equipped to face this kind of problem. So keeping your independence, keeping your capability of self-decision is, I would say, a very hard challenge. And one of France's preoccupation is to promote this goal and to convince our partners inside Europe that we should always prepare for new challenges, new difficulties, and make sure we never wake up one morning with a strange feeling that we cannot any longer decide for ourselves. This is, I would say, one absolutely main goal of French foreign policy.
So I believe what you say is that you would like to cooperate with other countries, but you will still not be 100% independent to other countries or dependent on other countries, so you will be able to manage.
Our natural habitat is Europe. We are part of Europe, and we believe that in the world as it is, when you look at giants like United States or China, France alone cannot do everything. It's not true. We don't have neither the resources, neither the size to manage, to preserve this decision capability and this independence of mind I was referring to. But we believe we can achieve that through Europe, and that Europe is at the right size, with the right capabilities, with the level of skills, with the scientific abilities, the researchers, the resources, the market, that will allow us to stay at this level of independence we are willing to be. So Europe is for us evidently the solution in the future, in which we will try to inscribe French destiny. So this is a profound conviction of our leaders for many years, and it's interesting to see that these leaders were coming from different parts, of the political scene. Some of them were from the right, some of them from the left, but all of them were convinced that Europe was our future, and it still is.
And that's probably the reason why you kind of changed your foreign policy towards especially Germany, because as we all know, after the First World War in Versailles, you were pushing a lot on sanctions on Germany because of the war, but after the Second World War, the policy became something completely different, where France actually tried to integrate Germany into Europe.
You're right.
What is the biggest reason for that?
It's obvious that in the mistakes, in the post-war mistakes of the First World War, the way Germany was treated, not only by France, but by the international community at the time, because the Treaty of Versailles is a result not only of French decision, even if we had a part, but of the international community, had an effect on what was the result, the Second World War. So instead of seeking punishment or trying to diminish the countries who were on the wrong side after the Second World War, the project was a much more difficult one to overcome what was a legitimate resentment and to come over huge suffering and atrocities, but to believe that it was more important for future generations to seek a positive project and to build together rather than to go back to the past and try, as it has been done right after the First World War, to punish a whole country. Some people had to be punished. Justice was sought. So after the Second World War, as you very well know, and some major notions as a crime against humanity were created in this purpose. So it doesn't mean anything was to be forgotten, but it meant that when it was coming to the destiny of future generation, you had to look at their future and not to try to seek revenge against those who were not there at the moment and who had no responsibility in what was happening. And I think the founding fathers of Europe has done a much more positive work when they had this extraordinary idea, because they had been also in the war, you know, they had living memories of that, so they could have perhaps stopped at that. It's easy for us who haven't been living in this period to say it's history and we shall look at the future. What is absolutely extraordinary in my eyes is that the generation who did that at the beginning were also the generation who had suffered from the war. So from their part, it's a much bigger effort than from our part. We are the beneficiaries in the matter, and we should look carefully at this inheritance, because this effort to transmit it to us.
They kind of build the foundation that we're living on.
Yes, they did.
They kind of did the dirty work, and now we're living on.
They did, and at great suffering.
And it's a very, very interesting topic. How like that change, and France is one of five legal countries to access nuclear weapons. Although these weapons comes with a huge financial cost, as we all know. How important is nuclear weapons regard to your national security today, and would you ever let these weapons go?
The first thing that I must remind to you and to those who will listen is that we don't threaten anybody. We are, I would say, a peaceful country, and we have no intention of threatening anybody in the world. What we seek is our security, and this was the initial purpose of creating a nuclear capability when it was decided by General de Gaulle and prepared by his predecessors. It was a condition of our independence in a context where there was a great imbalance in forces. Remember these times, we are in the Cold War, there is a huge force on the European continent that has been built with, at the time, some intention, ideological at least, to convert the whole continent to one ideology, and as we were indeed in the part of Europe who was a target, the leaders of the time thought that nuclear capability was the best answer to this question, because we didn't have the numbers or the resources to impress our potential adversary by numbers of troops or tanks or planes. But we could use what is called the deterrence from the weak to the strong, which means the cost of attacking you is so high and the risk is so high that, well, it's never worth doing it. And it has been proven quite useful or efficient, as we can see, because this created a kind of balance on the continent. Why are we still in this situation? Because we still believe that this capability, this deterrence from the weak to the strong, is still one important condition of our safety, as long as the world goes as it does now. It doesn't mean we are not in favor of arms control. We have proven it. We have, for instance, suppressed one of the components of our nuclear forces, the ground-based component. It has been abandoned now a few years ago. We have renounced any kind of nuclear essay in atmosphere. It has been also stopped almost 25 years ago now. And we have reduced the number of warheads we have in our arsenal. So we just went at what we think is the critical level, establishing our credibility on the matter, but showing that all this is done in a single purpose, not to be used and to maintain peace. If there was to be, in the future, a general movement in favor of the suppression of any nuclear weapon in the world, which is not at all the tendency today, it would open a new field. But it's not the case, and we are certainly not in the logic to say the democracy can decide to let go these tool of safety, while some less democratic countries would keep it. It's certainly not the way we think the world would be more secure.
And it's I actually believe in the peace theory that one of the biggest reasons why it haven't been a war between two superpowers after the Second World War is because of nuclear weapons. It's actually it's a possibility that it leads to huge problems, but it's also a huge reason why it's actually peace, because nobody aims to attack each other, because it's self-destruction basically. Do you have any thoughts about nuclear weapons and its maybe destruction in the upcoming 100 years? Do you have any thought about that?
Well, I don't work in fiction, so we try to stick to the reality as it is, and the reality is what I just described to you. We can be worried about the possibility of new countries acquiring nuclear weapons. This is one more immediate concern, and not in a so distant future. I am indeed referring to Iran.
Yeah.
And the international community is hard working to avoid this scenario, because we don't believe at all that nuclear dissemination would be a contribution to a safer world. We exactly believe the contrary. So it's today an important challenge for French diplomacy, but also for American diplomacy, for British diplomacy, and many other countries to make sure that Iran comes back to the implementation of the agreement of Vienna, and respects its commitments to this agreement. It has been difficult in the past few years because, as you probably know, during the previous administration in the United States, they back from the agreement. But now it's clear that the new American administration wants the implementation of the agreement, so we are all working together in this direction.
You were kind of afraid that, or you're concerned about Iran getting nuclear weapons. Wouldn't it, like they are on an ongoing conflict between Saudi Arabia as well as with Israel, wouldn't it in some way or another be positive that Iran would get nuclear weapons, because it would actually be probably preventable with war if Iran actually had them? Look at Kashmir conflict between Pakistan and India. Both are not able to attack each other because they both will end up in self-destruction. It's still like a common sense that Iran getting them, it's a bad idea. Do you have any thought about that?
The Middle East is one, as you know, of the most unstable part of the world. Sources of many different kind of conflicts, with surges of wars periodically, and it's not, in our view, that the acquisition of nuclear weapons by one of the protagonists in this part of the world would be in any way a contribution to the peace. We don't believe that at all. And we are collectively, with different countries I already mentioned, completely committed to make sure that this doesn't happen.
Do you believe in the Iran deal?
Yes, we did. We signed the Iran deal, we pushed for it, and it worked. It worked till the moment one of the major players went out and changed the strategy and decided to apply another strategy, which obviously at this stage has not been given very good results. So we believe we must go back to the full implementation of the so-called nuclear deal, which we should call non-nuclear deal, with Iran as soon as possible.
Is it possible to get back like you were 4 years ago?
Well, we believe there is still a way back to an implementation of the agreement, and some steps have been taken from the part of Iran, but this could be reversed. And what we want absolutely is that some irreversible steps are not crossed, so we can go back. It needs indeed a very specific dialogue between all the countries who are involved. It's not easy, we all know that, but we believe it's possible, yes.
It's an interesting topic with Iran, and I will just give last follow-up questions in that topic, because a lot of countries, not just France, but Britain, as well as Germany, Norway also, are afraid of Iran getting nuclear weapons, but it's still Israel and Saudi Arabia that is their closest neighbors, which kind of are the biggest rivalries to them geopolitically. Why do other countries get afraid of Iran getting nuclear weapons when it's, for example, France? Why are France afraid of Iran and their nuclear capability?
Once again, you are talking about one of the most unstable part of the world. Yeah. So anything that is a contribution to more instability increases the level of risk cannot be counted as a contribution to reducing the tensions and easing the peace and the good relations. We are very much convinced that, for instance, trade relation will diffuse the tension and increase the stability, but giving nuclear capability to one of the players will not. And it will be perceived as a major threat by the others. And if you perceive a major threat to your own existence, how do you react? So
yeah, and then probably Iran would be isolated even more, and they would just continue on their own because of when they get nuclear weapons. So
it will indeed trigger a completely different scenario with unpredictable outcomes.
Exactly. That's a perfect, understandable reason. Just a last question about security policy in France. What is the biggest threat to France today?
Certainly, as for many of our neighbors in other parts of the world, terrorism. Terrorism, as you know, has spread widely during the past years. It came on many disguises and shapes, but still at the root there are forces in the world who try to create tension and disrupting situation by blindly killing citizens, creating a feeling of fear, trying to destabilize institutions, democracies, and sometimes not only democracies but states. And this is something particularly hard to fight because well, they don't have an address, they don't have a known territory. They tried to, as you know, for a time with ISIS, in Iraq and Syria, but the first moment they get that, we knew what to target. And the reaction of the international community was to create a coalition and to roll them back. But we all know that terrorism will survive the disappearance of their territory in this part of the world, and that this threat will go on. So this is where we need, I would say, much vigilance, where we need a lot of international cooperation, where we need to exchange intelligence with our friends and allies, and we need imagination to be able to face the threat. So my feeling is that our main threat today is terrorism.
Right. Can you, or in Germany, they got a lot of migrants since the year 2014. France also got that, but it's still a huge difference between the number of terrorist attacks in Germany and France. Why is it so that France is suffering more under terrorist attacks than Germany?
Well, it's true that if you look at the figures, we have more. But it's not like we are all and the others nothing. So terrorism knows no border. I think the first thing to bear in mind, because once again, it has not one single origin. It would be very simple. If you knew who is the head of every terrorist attack in the world, we should just have to target the head. But it's not like that. It's in a hydra, and all the head are not related to the same body. So to answer your question about the fact, it's true that perhaps we have stood very firmly on the international ground on some cases where we also had to suffer some consequences. One example I can take is indeed our position, which is a very traditional one in France, about freedom of expression. We have always stood for the fact that in France you can say whatever you like, whenever you want, providing you are not calling for murder of other people because of their religion, of their race, or anything like that. But if you want to mock somebody, you can. And we don't set boundaries on this matter because it's how we see the freedom of expression. And France is perfectly well known for that in the world, and it also explains what we have been the target of some very bloody attacks on our soil.
So compared to like Germany or Belgium, it's more coincidence that it actually happens in France. It's no ideological things, because freedom of expression, it's in France, but it's also in Germany.
Yes, but perhaps it is more, I would say, used in France, you know, with this
Charlie Hebdo.
Yes, the spirit related to a French tradition, Voltaire, Rousseau, they were mocking at the time the Catholic religion very harshly, and they were not taking gloves in the way they were expressing. And this tradition, intellectual tradition, has been going on. You can like or not taste of some cartoon in Charlie Hebdo. That is a matter of personal appreciation. Not everybody is, I would say, there is nothing mandatory in liking them. But what is not disputable is the right for the cartoonist to draw his cartoon. And as one child said recently, in reference to tragic events we had known last autumn, a cartoon has never killed anybody. Never.
Right. Yeah, that's a perfectly good example of that, because Charlie Hebdo is a newspaper that is well known for its characters, and it uses the freedom of speech very much compared to every other newspaper I know in the world. But it's still the freedom of speech and the freedom of right. So it's a good maybe reason for that's why France are more targeted.
We believe so.
In other countries, which probably is. Over to history, France is, in my view, the most interesting country if you look at modern history. And as we all know, that in the year of
I cannot dispute that.
I don't think you can dispute that. As we know that France in the year of 1966 left NATO. This due to bad relationship with the United States. How can you describe the relationship between France and the United States today?
Just a nuance on the way you express it. We never left NATO. France has been part of the alliance since its creation, 1949, and we never stopped that. What we left at the moment you are referring to is the integrated military organization, which is quite different. So we, at the time, General de Gaulle was the French president, said, I don't want my armed forces completely under the command of a foreign general. That was at the time, and still is, an American general. So I want the full control of my armed forces, so we will still be ULI, and we will still be committed to the treaty. For instance, the famous Article 5, which means one attack against one of us is an attack against all of us, and we have never, ever wavered with that. So, to make things clear, we are a member of NATO, we are always been, and we intend to go on being a member of NATO. What we believe strongly is that if you want a strong European security, it's better than Europeans themselves contribute as much as possible to this security. And security is not a matter you cannot completely delegate to somebody else. Because if you delegate it, well, you may be in a very good position, but you also might be one day in a weaker position. And now I come to the French-American relationship. I think the past 4 years have demonstrated that even if the United States are our strongest and, as for France, I would say more ancient ally, we have been friends with the United States since their creation, as you probably know. We helped that a lot. And I would say among the countries that are the most significant military powers in Europe, that would be Germany, UK, Italy, the largest one. I believe we are the only one who've never been at war with the United States in the whole history. So I think it's fair to say we are a very old and very reliable ally, which doesn't mean we always agree with everything. And I think that more the sound that is sometimes heard in the French tune, the fact that sometimes we say, well, on this matter, we don't think you're right. Can take an example in the recent history. We were not convinced at the time that Saddam Hussein had mass weapon destruction in his country when the United States decided to attack Iraq and invade it. And we said all our intelligence showed that he doesn't have them. So attacking it and invading Iraq for this reason is not sound, because we don't believe that. I think we have been proved right on the matter, but at the moment it was heard as a huge gap between France and the United States, simply because we didn't agree with their analysis and with their action. But still, if you look at other episodes in history when important things have been at stakes, we are always siding with our allies, with our American friends, We do it in Syria, we do it on the Libyan matter, we do it in most of the world crisis. So the way we behave is we think that we are an even more valuable ally if we speak the truth. And if we sometimes have our own mind, our own analysis, based indeed on what we can find and our own knowledge of some international matter, and tell the American. But there is nothing in all that that's changed the fact that we are a strong member of NATO, strong allies among the alliance, and one of the countries who is making the most important military effort. Because when you look after that at the way the alliance works and the way it can defend its member, well, it's based mostly on the fact that we have military capabilities. And it's true that after the fall of the Berlin Wall and the disaggregation of the Soviet Empire, there has been a tendency among many European countries to reduce their military expenditures and to think it was possible to go on in a peaceful world because more or less the threat had disappeared. And it has obviously weakened our military capabilities between, I would say, the early 90s and till during almost 15 years, there has been a kind of general reduction in this effort. And now everybody is understanding that if you want to secure peace, you have to be prepared. So we are among the countries inside the alliance who are making the greatest efforts to keep our military capabilities, to modernize our armies, to seek cooperation with other European countries, to create common programs for a new air fighter, for a new battle tank, for many other subjects, more, I would say, modern ones like cyber or space. All of that are for us excellent fields to create cooperation with our ally inside EU and inside NATO. So we see no contradiction in all that, but just a coherence with this simple idea that if Europe wants to be protected, Europe has to contribute to its own protection. And we will be even better protected with our great American alliance if we are making some efforts on our part.
Exactly. So, just short follow-up questions. As we talked about, the relationship were worsened over the 4 years of Mr. Trump. Is it back to where it was before Mr. Donald Trump took office right now?
Generally, diplomacy and many other fields, generally the time doesn't flow backwards, you know, it flows always in the same direction. So the idea today is not to say we will go back to the enchanted old days. It's not, I think, in the mind of anybody. But what we can obviously recreate first is that atmosphere of trust between allies. As I said previously, we can disagree sometimes among allies, but if we disagree, we can say on what point we disagree, I would say in a trustful dialogue and using the proper channels and the good way to do that. You don't have to break plates and to act in a manner that was obviously not fitted for an island. So trust is back, and doesn't mean, once again, we are in full alignment on everything. What we are trying to build, there is today a ministerial meeting in NATO of foreign ministers with the first participation of Secretary of State Antony Blinken, who is coming to Brussels for this meeting. And I think it will be an important moment for the Atlantic Alliance to acknowledge the fact we are now fully back to a normal way of working together. But we don't work to recreate the past. We work to secure the future, and that is indeed the most important thing.
Exactly. And just a follow-up there, the United States and France France is the oldest ally of the United States, supporting them in the War of Independence against the British as the first, and later on as well has never been into a war with the US. That's compared to Russia, which you are not having the same relationship with.
No, we have been at war with Russia.
Yeah.
So we have been even the only one, to reach Moscow.
Okay, you have. That's something different.
That's a joke, but as there is a saying that history never teaches anything except one: you should not invade Russia at the beginning of the summer.
Correct. In June, it's the worst place. You should begin further before, I guess. Learn that from Hitler. But yeah, if you compare Germany's relationship to Russia, they have a lot of trade with Russia, more than France had. What is your relationship to the Russians compared to other EU members?
Our behavior with Russia is quite simple. We believe, but it's a fact that Russia is part of the same continent as we are. And as our goal is to establish as peaceful climate and relation as possible on this continent, Russia is obviously a country we should talk to. And there is no way to achieve stability and to establish relation if you don't communicate. So that is our permanent motto. We shall and we must have a dialogue with Russia. It doesn't mean we are naive. It doesn't mean we have not condemned what has been done by Russia in Crimea or in Ukraine. It doesn't mean we don't know what has happened and what the consequences have been for the borders in Europe, as they should have not been modified. So all this is clear for us, and we stand with our allies on the matter. Take an example, in the NATO common work, there is advanced forces ensuring the security in the airspace that separates the limit of the European borders and Russian territory. We regularly send forces in the Baltic countries to be part of that. So there is in our behavior two components that must be well understood. One, on the one hand, we believe that we should have a dialogue with Russia to create more stability on our common continent. On the other hand, we are fully aware of some Russians' acts in the recent years. We condemn them. We participate to the sanction against Russia, and we stand firmly as a NATO member and a NATO ally.
And as an EU member as well, because as I last week talked to the German embassy about the EU sanctions Russia on their own way from the United States. So it's no policy made up by somebody else. It's actually the EU that's made it.
And we are advocating inside EU to make sure these sanctions are taken and implemented.
Right. It's a very, very interesting topic. Now over to another little bit more historical question. From an early age, we students in Norway learn about French philosophers such as Montesquieu, Rousseau, and Voltaire, which inspired the French Revolution, and then came back to Europe and were one of the main thinkers about the French Revolution. We can say that, I believe. Which importance do you feel that these thinkers have in today's world? And which countries are today nearby following the steps of France and their revolution?
It's a very stimulating matter. When you compare the different, I would say, stream of thinking in the world, you see that, in fact, only two great political events had this pretension to be universal. And the first one was the American Revolution. It was designed to set a model not only for the United States, but for mankind. And the second one is France, because we did exactly say more or less the same thing at the time of the French Revolution. That was the intent of the Déclaration universelle des droits de l'homme, Universal Declaration of Men's Rights, which is in its spirit, not so far from the American Declaration of Independence. And at the root of these major writings and moment of history, you have the French thinker you were referring to. So we were convinced, I would say on both sides of the Atlantic, we are being part of a universal model. And this has inspired probably both American foreign policy and, in a more modest way, French politics during a very long time. And perhaps we were thinking, after the Second World War, with the creation of the United Nations and the whole apparatus of multilateralism, that we were in a continuing process of expansion of this model, and that it should logically be adopted progressively in all parts of the world. And it was only a matter of time that we were not completely in this kind of organization, with democratic institution and all the components we know, with the continuous creation of new rights also for individuals. We were convinced that in a matter of decades that would be the whole world. And this is where we were wrong, because when you look at the most recent period, it's not like that at all. It's almost the contrary. You have some part of the world where democracies were created, were not able to go on. There are, even in very old democracies, some turmoil about the way things should do. Even in the temple of democracy, that was the Congress of the United States, we have seen very strange things not so long ago. So this is a lesson for all of us, that perhaps we were not careful enough, believing that this model was so convincing, it was imposing itself everywhere, and that perhaps we should be more careful in defending it, illustrating its virtues, and showing how precious it is. So to answer your question, I think today we still stand by the principle that has been written and created by these men. There were refugees, I could say women, but among them there were mostly men at the time. And we still believe it is at the core of our political organization, our social organization. It has expanded in tremendous proportion since the time all this was said and written, but still there is a fragility. And so our first goal and preoccupation should be to make sure this is preserved at home and to strengthen it and to make our democracy stronger and resilient. And then we can look abroad and try to convince, more than anything in any other world, to convince others that this works. But if you have weak democracies where there is instability, where the social balances are not well protected, well, the model will be seen as a failure, and it will weaken this great idea born in the second part of the 18th century, and the idea on which we are still living.
Yeah, that's the idea of pluralism, that they are kind of opposed the universal and global movement for human rights, because they know that it can be kind of abused. Like if you say Iraq, the invasion of Iraq, first the United States say we're going in there to get away their chemical weapons, and then after they don't find any, they say it was because of the human rights. And then it's kind of like getting abused. Human rights are actually abused. So while you are arguing that the countries that implement it should defend it on their own, on back home, but not necessarily go abroad with it. Is that
I mean that the way you can spread democracy is certainly not by imposing it by, I would say, foreign militaries. It doesn't work like that. Because those who are, I would say, the target of your benevolent action don't exactly resent it like that. So the best way we can help democracy to grow and spread around the world is to show our model are working, and they provide the best possible level of welfare, stability, justice, what they are designed to do. And you see how quickly some regimes who are not democratic are keen on showing that we have failures and they do better. For instance, on the recent event of the pandemic. I don't need to name anybody to just illustrate the situation. So we must prove our efficiency and not only our virtues. And our virtues are, I believe, extremely important because these are our values. But it's even better when the values work, and that's what we have to show.
Exactly. I got a last question of this history issue for this week's meeting, and the question is: even though the First and Second World War has both taken place in France, you managed to rebuild, especially after the First World War, which were quite disaster. Can you still see some effects of these wars in France today?
Well, first, the collective memory is still, I would say, marked with these events, but it is changing because at some point, when you look at the past, it is, I would say, what we could call immediate memory. And when the times go on, it becomes history. For my generation, I was mentioning that we have never known a war or anything like it. So it's I would say distant memory, but I have known a generation, I have talked to a generation who was affected directly by it. So I have, I would say, a direct relation, to this past. For my children, who have not done so, it's history. Like for me, the French Revolution. So it creates a different link. It's still a link. So the First World War is clearly history now, and there are no obvious traces, except one thing. When you visit France, in every village of France, even the smallest one, you will see a monument with the names of those who have fallen in this conflict, the First World War. And it's always extremely impressive. You pay attention, because you see that in a very small place, where there are perhaps a few hundred inhabitants, you have maybe 20, 30 names of people who died. And sometimes you have entire families, because you see there were large families. So you see there are perhaps 2, 3, 4 brothers who never came back. So this is, I would say, the last way the new generation can relate to the event of First World War. That's why teaching history is so important, and illustrating history is so important, because you cannot have a clear understanding of the present, and more important, a clear vision of the future, if you don't remember at all where you come from, what has been the events defining your past, and what were the tragedies of the past times, because if you know them, you will be more eager to avoid these tragedies coming back and reproducing themselves. So this link is now completely, I would say, an abstract one, and not so direct as it was 50 years ago, or in the more distant past. Indeed, nobody now can say, I have lived that, because it's not true anymore. But it's important that people can say, I know what happened, and I know I understand how we can avoid it for the future, which is, in fact, the most important thing.
Very, very, very interesting. I appreciate a lot. This is the first part of our seminar with you, Mr. Ambassador of France, and we will be back next week, so I will see you then.